Oh, well, kia ora and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us again for our post-COVID vision series, where we're talking to leaders on their vision for New Zealand, and particularly around the use of accelerating technology. We know that the COVID pandemic demonstrated the importance of digital readiness, and we've seen some significant things come out of that. And so we've decided we wanted to speak to a variety of people in different sectors and different backgrounds. Not all of them are technologists. And so today in this session, we're going to be talking with Dominick Stevens, who is the chief economist at Westpac Bank. Now, I've looked his bio up, and he's got about 14 years of experience at the bank. And prior to that, he was at the Reserve Bank. So he's got a wealth of experience in the New Zealand economy. He speaks 4 languages fluently. And then Dominick was telling me that he speaks a smattering of Mongolian. And we may have to have you back again for another type of interview when we would talk about that. But certainly since the end of COVID, you've been talking about the acceleration of digitisation. So afternoon, Dominick.
Good afternoon.
All right, well, let's get straight into it. When you're talking about digitisation, what do you mean, or what do you think of when you use that word?
I mean, digitisation is the use of digital technologies for either consumption or production. So it could mean for a consumer just going online to do their purchases rather than going to a shop, or for a firm it could mean conducting meetings online or doing production in a more digital fashion. I think the really important thing for an economist to think about is digitisation does not necessarily mean what new technologies are emerging, what is the frontier of technology. It really refers to the rate at which, or our propensity to use existing technologies. So I think what's happened with COVID, obviously, is there hasn't been the emergence of any particular new technologies, but a whole bunch of people who wouldn't otherwise have done so have learned to use digital technologies, and in some cases, they'll decide to carry on with that. And that is why I would say that COVID accelerated the inevitable process of digitisation. Perhaps we had, 5 or 10 years of digitisation in a single couple of months.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because that was what I was going to mention to you, is about, all sorts of numbers bandied around about 10 times the amount of digitisation in that session. But your comment about 5 to 8 years or 10 was really was apt. You keep an eye on the New Zealand economy. You're at the bank, so you obviously got clients, etc. So what are some of the examples that you saw that were almost forced upon us during COVID-19?
Yeah, I think forced is a good word. So klutzers like me, were forced to learn to use digital technologies, to learn to cope with having staff work from home, working from home yourself. Firms were forced to cope with that. We were forced to have meetings online. I mean, those are sort of the obvious ones. There was a huge increase in digital commerce. And we first observed it in China, actually, that digital purchases just went through the roof as people sought to avoid having to go to the shop. An interesting one that I was just reading about in the newspaper this morning was virtual tourism. So a person who used to do tours in Dunedin is now offering virtual reality tours of Dunedin, personalised. So she actually accompanies the people on a group of about 25 people who can ask questions. It's all virtual reality. So that's been forced in a way, and it's perhaps a more creative one. There was a big increase in uptake of home streaming services and the likes of that sort of thing. There's also been a change in work practices at perhaps more traditional workplaces. So the need for social distancing created a need for new factory layouts. And perhaps again, it's not that there were new technologies available, but firms were forced to use the technology they had on the factory floor a little bit differently to allow for social distancing. In a few cases, the thing is they will have found better ways of doing things by being forced to experiment around. A lot of people will just post-COVID go back to what they used to do. Also, in a lot of cases, people have experimented and have found something new and are probably going to stick with it.
It was I read some stats the other week from not your bank but one of the other big four banks around the number of people that had to learn to use online banking, and I was shocked almost by the number of people who weren't using it previously. It seemed to really low numbers. Can't remember. It was below 50%.
Yeah, I think one of the comments I had from one of my colleagues here at Westpac was that Westpac kept a certain number of branches open at a certain amount of time during or certain times of the day during the lockdown. And basically, they said the branches were there to provide lessons for people to use online banking. And actually, I think this gets us to another one of the issues that I think you wanted to talk about, Craig, which is the digital divide.
Yeah.
So, there are a lot of people not using technologies that are available, perhaps to their detriment, perhaps because they're not comfortable with those technologies, or perhaps they don't have the hardware to do so because they can't afford to do so. And in the case of banking, basically banks tried to make it easier for people to adopt digital banking. But like I say, the branches were converted into little lesson rooms for people to learn how to do online banking, and it really increased the uptake. And it dragged that long tail. There's always a long tail with the adoption of any new technology. For some people, they never really adopt. COVID forced them to. Like I said, it's klutzers like me who aren't really very good with technology who are forced to learn.
Yeah, that's right. That digital divide is an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's like a chicken and the egg scenario sometimes. A number of people there's a small group of people who are in the technology industry that always use new technology. And then there's klutzers like you that have it available but don't necessarily take it up.
Yeah.
Do you see a role for like organisations like the bank helping those laggards come through?
Yeah, absolutely. So absolutely, I think firms. Well, for a start, let me say, the digitisation we've seen due to COVID, as I say, it was a number of years all at once. So I always think disruptive events like this accelerate trends that were already in place. The economy rising. In many cases, I think firms would do well just to accept that has happened. It's not going back, and now is a good time to basically educate your customers on how to use the product in a more digital fashion. I also think there's a role for the state here. So at schools, I think digitalisation or the COVID really highlighted the digital divide. So it became really kids who were further behind at school got even further behind because they also the ones perhaps they got a bad home situation and they don't have the hardware available to participate or the communication technology available to participate in online classes, and they fell even further behind. So I think there's a clear role for the state as well to address that digital divide.
Yeah. Let's just go back to digitisation in a moment because you wrote about it, that increase and the impact on the economy. And I think just thinking about immediate post-COVID, how do you see that increase in digitisation and that momentum and that technology supporting us through what is going to be a pretty challenging time over the next 12 to 18 months?
I think basically COVID is something that could well damage productivity in the New Zealand economy or all around the world. So international linkages have been severed. Economies, we're talking about sort of supply chains have been disrupted. People are becoming more national rather than international, and all of that is bad for productivity. Also, think we're going to have a period of unemployment. We're going to have a big recession, and what happens during recessions is entrepreneurs find it harder to obtain the funds they need. Good ideas within firms don't get funded. people who would have otherwise had great ideas find themselves unemployed and their skills atrophy. All of this is going to cost us in the long run and reduce our productivity relative to what it could have been, therefore reduce our standard of living. Right. I do think that the silver lining on the otherwise dark cloud of the productivity recession is the fact that we have been forced to digitize and perhaps we've found new ways of doing things. And I'm not for a second suggesting that COVID has increased the productivity of the overall economy. It has reduced it. But this increased digitization is perhaps a silver lining and will perhaps reduce the long-term damage from COVID. That's how I'd put it.
Okay, all right. You said you're not a technologist. We've had this conversation, but could you cast your mind forward a few years? I mean, just use your imagination, Dominic, because you read. I'm sure you read widely, and you know what's happening in the economy. What sort of digital transformation would you expect to have taken place over the next 5 years, and its impact on its impact on the New Zealand economy?
Yeah, I mean, basically, commerce is moving online. We're doing things in a far more digital fashion. As I say, I think it's trends that have been going on for some time are likely to be accelerated. And I think there's a couple of key ways that this will play out. First of all, increased digitization creates a more winner-takes-all marketplace for everything. So it basically means that any individual's skills are more replicable. So back in the day, you and I might have done this interview in front of 100 people at some kind of a live event. Now we're doing it online, and it can be relayed to as many people as we want. If we do a good enough job, everyone will watch it. If we do a bad job, only a few people will watch it. The best interview will be the one that everyone chooses to watch.
Yep.
So it creates a winner-takes-all market. Now, for the New Zealand economy, that means two really important things. First, more revenue to San Francisco. People often talk about the opportunities from digitalization, but it's also worth considering the threats. We're talking Netflix rather than TVNZ, Uber rather than Blue Bubble Taxi, Airbnb rather than Book a Batch. It's revenue going to San Francisco because people want the best possible service, and that can be delivered globally. And that I think will continue to hollow out some New Zealand industries. By the same token, digitization reduces the tyranny of distance that the New Zealand economy has always suffered. We're sort of isolated down here in the South Pacific. It allows us the opportunity to become the winner that took all. So it creates opportunities for New Zealand firms to become the new Xero in their Xero, the accounting firm, in their industry. So I could well expect that new global champion New Zealand firms emerge in particular niches. We'll be the global champion of tiny things because we're a tiny country. Meanwhile, we will adopt the global solution to a range of other products. The winner-takes-all environment also, it probably does lead to more inequality in the labour market because some people are really, really able to use digital technologies to enhance what they do and replicate what they do and deliver the service to a lot of people, and therefore they add a lot of value.
Yep.
And the rest get left behind. So the emerging digitization risks leaving people behind, and that actually raises a whole issue about what government can do about it. We can or can do to facilitate the digital transformation. I've mentioned that digitization mostly leads to agglomeration or a winner-takes-all type environment. So it's unfortunately New Zealand's not really at the centre of the world, and so that works against us. Yeah, there is one form of manufacturing that's emerging, or has emerged around the rest of the world. It hasn't really been taken up much by New Zealand that I think could take off in the coming 5 years or so, and that's basically 3D printing. So bespoke, short-run, just-in-time manufacturing, where it's a specialist product required by perhaps a firm. They really require a high degree of interaction with the manufacturer, a high degree of specialization and customization, and it's actually facilitated by basically 3D printing or associated technologies.
Yep.
that is actually shortening supply chains and bringing manufacturing closer to markets. And so we could well find, even as we're finding that our medium tech manufacturing, like the aluminium smelter, are unfortunately being hurt by COVID, we may well find that this sort of newer form of high-tech manufacturing takes off in New Zealand over the coming 5 years. Again, as supply chains shorten. And they're partly shortening because people are worried about international trade with COVID. It's giving a great opportunity for that form of new technology. Yeah.
Hey, for someone who's not a technologist, that's a pretty good answer. And there's a lot in there that we could unpack another time. I'm going to ask you the last question because we're only doing a short interview. And maybe I'll ask Dominick Stevens rather than the chief economist of Westpac this one. Cast your mind out, 10 years' time. What sort of technology would Dominick Stevens see happening, and what would you hope comes to fruition in that time? I mean, do you want to be in a driverless car, for example?
I suppose if I could cast my mind to anything, it would be health technology. Actually, longer lifespan. That would be the wish. The highest on the wish list for me personally would be greater health and a longer lifespan for everyone. So better health technology. And I think there's leaps and bounds in all sorts of ways. And people who know a lot more about it than me sort of understand more about the frontier. But yeah, that'd be highest on my wish list.
Okay. Alrighty. Hey, thanks so much for your time, Dominick. We really appreciate you taking it and being part of our conversation. Thanks, everybody. We're going to be, this will be on our website shortly, and it'll be part of a series where we're taking these topics. So thanks very much, Dominick.
Cheers, Craig.